Hi there. My name's Charlie Greig. I'm a geologist and a geologic advisor to American Eagle Gold Corp, who is exploring the NAC, the rediscovery of the NAC porphyry copper gold moly system in central BC. And American Eagle has been very active this winter, hammering away at NAC with recent drilling.
Charlie, thank you for the introduction. Good to meet you. I see we're in esteemed company. We've got the left representative through Che Guevara, and we've got the right represented through Donald Trump. You know, it's kind of you're trying to balance your influences, perhaps.
That's right. Yeah, I don't want to scare anybody off on either side. I'm really kind of a centrist overall, just trying to discover some mineral resources that people across the globe can utilize and, bring wealth to their economies. They can take it whatever way they want, but I've worked, in Cuba, and I've worked in Trump country for sure.
And by the looks of it, you've worked in Eritrea as well.
That's correct. Yeah, I've worked there quite a bit. Great people in Eritrea. Yes, you bet. I've worked there a lot. It's a wonderful part of the world.
Well, now you're in Canada. We can do the mashup with Trump's strapline. You know, make Canada great again. And not that it was never great. But tell me about NAC. First of all, how did you come to know about it, and have you been part of the kind of the story with American Eagle for a while?
Well, I've known about it for quite a while. In fact, I had adjacent mineral claims staked personally probably, 10 to 15 years ago. An ex-staking partner of mine, ex-prospecting partner of mine, Bernie Kreft, is the underlying rights holder. So he's held that property for a long time. And it was kind of through that connection, I think, how they got a hold of us. Our group, I run a small consulting firm kind of named after me, and the fellas who have done most of the work are the geologists that have done most of the work. They're not all fellas on the property for American Eagle, work for me in our small group, and they contacted us. We had a kind of a decent reputation, partly from discovering another porphyry farther to the northwest in BC, the Saddle North deposit in GT Gold, and that was taken out by Newmont in 2021. We had that reputation, we had that connection, and they brought us in, involved us, and we did a lot of the technical work.
And when I go through the American Eagle presentation, there's a section at the back which talks about the history. And I'm intrigued to see that some of the early discovery holes were drilled in the 1960s.
That's right. Actually, it was a discovery from what I've read that is credited to Noranda. Noranda's explored a lot of properties across Canada and elsewhere. Obviously, eventually, I think after numerous takeovers and mergers, etc., it's become a Vale or maybe Glencore, I forget, or maybe both. And yes, they were there doing stream sediment sampling, I think in 1964. So they got anomalous copper in one of the creeks and just went from there and did staged systematic exploration, and it culminated in drilling, and they made the discovery then in the late 60s, I would imagine, or maybe early 70s, but did quite a bit of drilling in the early 70s.
And then there've been a kind of various waves of exploration that have gone through. Hera exploration got us involved. Copper Ridge was involved, and then it was kind of it came into American Eagle at the end of 2021, and last year 7 holes were drilled, lots of mineralization, some pretty good grades were in there. Can you summarize where you think the understanding of the deposit is now, once you've kind of assimilated the information up to the end of last year's drilling?
Yes, I think the difference between sort of then and now is all these other programs, the drilling has been quite shallow. So up until fairly recently, they didn't do, underground block cave bulk mining of porphyry style deposits. It was mainly just open pit, and you really, couldn't do a practical open pit all that deeply on most of the smaller deposits anyway, cost effectively. So they didn't explore very deeply. And I don't think there was a hole drilled below, say, 350 meters below surface at NAC until this year. And so that's kind of changed things, is that the fellows that brought this project to American Eagle recognized through some deeper looking airborne geophysical surveys that there was some roots to the NAC system, and that prompted a sort of a deeper look that has driven this most recent phase of exploration.
The potential to find a kind of system which goes at depth, maybe a kind of a high grade core, that's kind of the key attraction to it. Typically when one looks at porphyry systems, there's normally this kind of vertical zonation, but I've noticed in a few of the BC porphyries that there's a kind of there's an inclined nature to the intrusions or perhaps alteration, and I wonder whether that is a feature of emplacement or whether it's some kind of post-emplacement deformation, a rotation, or a kind of structural change. I wonder what your take is. Do you think it's kind of that's the way that the stock came in originally?
I would say, the drive is more vertical. I'm sure there are some inclined parts of porphyry systems, but I would say in BC, which has seen a lot of deformation, through the eons, if you want. Really, it's most of British Columbia is relatively young geologically, so it would be mostly sort of Mesozoic deformation. So, post 300 or post really, post 300 for sure. But this system is actually quite young. This is probably an Eocene age system. So, post 50 or 50 and younger, a little bit younger. And so I would say this has a better chance of being upright. It hasn't been subjected to the big mid-Cretaceous deformation or Triassic-Jurassic boundary type deformation. So this one, has a better chance of being more upright. And it sort of seems that way, that most of the contacts that we've seen, in the drilling, and it's not a very well exposed area, so there's not a great surface control geologically, but most of the contacts seem pretty steep. So it seems like it is kind of upright, and you tend to have the heat flow. Things are going more or less straight up. So, unless there's some stratigraphic control that exists prior that might control things that way, it might be more of a vertical orientation.
It's certainly simpler to understand, and it's kind of all of the theory kind of is based on a kind of on a vertical system. So that's
right. Yeah.
And the drill holes last year were driven by geophysics. You had this in the presentation. There's a nice concentric kind of mag anomaly, and then there's a halo IP anomaly, presumably kind of picking out the pyrite shell around the flanks of the main porphyry stock. You call it the Babine stock, don't you? That's kind of the main intrusion phase. Do you feel that the drilling correlated well with what you saw?
I think geophysically, yes, it broadly does. I mean, it's a big geophysical system, and it's kind of hard to see the details within that, but there are some details. If you model it up well, you can see that if you get the right modeler, and the geophysical data generally is pretty good. Pretty much all pre-existing. It definitely is all pre-existing. We didn't do any, at least so far. Yes, it kind of has yielded what was expected. We targeted that, a kilometer down, and that was a deep geophysical anomaly that was outlined by an airborne geophysical survey, kind of within that mag high and within that pyrite shell that's imaged by the IP chargeability.
And you talk about there's another stock. One of your holes, I think it was hole 4, went into the, I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, Nakini-Lerak stock, which is a kind of a separate. It was labelled as being different to the Babine stock. So, do you see lots of pulses of different kind of chemistry and different mineralization, or is it just that you can identify the the host rock as a different mineralizing, or sort of a different emplacement?
Yeah, there's a number of different phases. Some of them are hard to tell from what may be the host rock. There could be an early mineral phase that's very difficult to identify because of the alteration. Maybe we'll be able to do that when we work up the trace element data a bit better. But yes, the NAC, yeah, it's a tricky one to pronounce for sure, and I'm not even sure I have it right. But Nakamilarack is kind of the way I do it. But yeah, it is a tricky one. So NAC is an obvious way to go. But yeah, it seems there's an intrusive phase, and there's a bit of argument about this. We had someone in yesterday that thought one of them was maybe a host to facies rock that was mineralized, but I call them a copper dikes, and it makes it simple. They're loaded with bornite, disseminated bornite. They have a few bornite veins in them, but generally they're just loaded with fine-grained disseminated bornite, and even small bornite millimeter scale aggregates that are a little bit bigger. And these are coming right up, probably late in the emplacement of these bodies, but they're dike-like features, generally steep, and very well mineralized, and they would be post the stock, the Babine porphyry stock.
Okay, so you've got a first phase of the kind of the apophysis comes up with its kind of mineralizing fluids, and then you've got these kind of cross-cutting dikes, which are bornite rich and sometimes have bornite veins in them. I mean, some of the photographs are really beautiful, really stunning.
That's right. Yes, the mineralization is gorgeous, really. Especially those veins are very graphic, and the purple bornite is beautiful. And sometimes there's chalcopyrite in there, and there's also primary chalcocite. I didn't believe it at first, but I've been convinced now. And yes, those copper minerals are more copper rich than chalcopyrite, so it really adds to things when you get those kind of things in the rocks.
Now, presumably, those dikes are not important volumetrically. They won't move the needle on kind of a bulk tonnage, but they may be important vectors for you.
Well, yeah, I think that's right. Maybe what we've seen, volumetrically, some of them are thin. We've had some pretty broad intercepts of those things, and not really been too sure, what the true width of those things are. The dike contacts can be modified structurally, so we're not really sure whether they turn and go more sill-like or how thick they are originally. I think they're really important to understand because, if you can get a dike swarm, for example, and dikes often do occur in swarms where, there's a number of them, over a certain width. If you get a bunch of those together, then the wall rock, I think, is going to be very well mineralized. So in combination, I think that could be tremendous, actually, and I think it's worth exploring. And it also kind of depends on the host rock that they're emplaced into. It seems like, for example, at NAC, there's a host conglomeratic sequence that really sucks up the mineralization. And I would guess, and it's an educated guess. Some people would say, well, if it's a guess by Charlie, it's not all that well educated, and they're probably right. But with some of these dikes coming through this sort of more permissive host, maybe it's more permeable. I'm not sure, but I think that's a great place to be sort of searching for where those two things come together. The conglomerate, it was and we don't really know the age of that. Obviously, it's older than the dikes and older than the stock, but when the conglomerate comes together with some of these well-mineralized dikes, that could be a great place to look for more high-grade ore.
What are your tools for vectoring in on, let's say, an increased density of dikes, or a possible location of the intersection between dikes and conglomerates, and or navigating the kind of classic porphyry architecture? What do you you've done the geophysics, you've got some basic drilling. how do you kind of work on the fine tuning or the granularity, as the is a popular phrase, I think.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it just leads to how do we explore this thing? And I would say, it's geology, but where do you get that geology? You're going to get that geology from looking at the historic data. We started to do that. Is it detailed enough, the logging? Do they identify the same lithologies? And then it's just drilling, really. Drilling and doing good geology and trying to link up what we've seen in these, we did 7 holes that are all fairly deep, but they're the only deep holes on the property. We basically don't have hardly any of the previous core. I mean, the latest drilling was 2008, and that is out there, I think, stored out in the, out near where the drill holes were drilled. And I'm not sure if we've gone and got that or not, but that's what I was told just the other day at PDAC, that, by Jerry Carlson, who ran the company Copper Ridge that drilled in 2008. He said the core was out there. So I don't think we've located that yet, but it'd be good to look at that and then start tying the geology together. Really, it's maybe a little bit more geophysics, but pretty much drilling and then geology, just trying to put it all together.
It's I've got the historic data here. Yes. There's 18,000 meters drilled over time. Noranda did about 1,800. Hira did about 15,000 meters, average depth 200 meters, with one hole that went down to 466 below surface. And Copper Ridge did under 1,000 meters in 4 holes.
Yes.
So in total, 18,000 meters historic, and you've got 6,000 meters, and which has got those deep pierce points. So obviously, it'd be good to get access to that core, but trying to locate the collars and trying to reconstruct that's quite a challenge in itself, isn't it? What's your drill plan for this year, or what's the next drilling phase going to entail?
Well, that is being planned right now, but I think a really simplistic way of looking at it is to go, okay, well, where was the best near surface? Where were the best near surface results? Well, we kind of collared from a zone that was known as the South Zone, which is the richest zone that was outlined in the previous drilling. And you have to remember, this is a big system with that pyrite halo, so that chargeability high has been targeted by some of those old holes, and that's quite a ways out from where we drilled. So we're sort of focused in on a particular area, and we drilled some holes that were a fair ways away from some of the South Zone holes that had been drilled previously. So we've sort of expanded the surface footprint of the best copper gold mineralization at surface. But for our drilling coming up, I think what we want to do is to continue to expand that and understand that higher grade near surface part, because that's really where where a project makes it or breaks it, is do you have some good, easily accessible mineralization? So some really, truly economic mineralization. And then we want to tie that good mineralization to, say the zone where we hit good mineralization or really good mineralization at the upper part of, say, hole 4 to the north, tie that together, and then tie all that near surface better mineralization to the better intercepts at depth. How can we do that? And I think the thing is to drill from near that South Zone initially, and then just work it down and tie everything together at depth, because just prospecting deep holes, trying to link things up really, really deep, is an expensive way to go, and it's hard to do that. There's just not much information there, right?
Yeah. In a sense, I can understand kind of a small step out if you wanted to kind of do an incremental expansion of your underground, of your deeper resource, but to try and tie up unknowns, that's a relatively high risk and high cost way of doing it. Do you see any benefit in more surface work, whether that's geology, geochemistry, or geophysics, to kind of get your recent overlay, or are you comfortable with the data sets that you've got?
I think generally we're comfortable. We have discussed with a geophysicist who's a good friend of mine that was involved with the with the Saddle North discovery, Alex Walcott. And he's looked at the previous geophysics for us and recommended just a couple 3 lines maybe of IP across this to sort of look a little deeper than the previous IP, but not a big or expensive survey. And I think we're in agreement with that. There is a new logging road system in there. So we drilled all of the holes this year, from a clear cut. So, it's just easier access and perhaps there's some more exposure that is evident from recent logging cuts, etc. So certainly we'll look at that, and I think we will. We'll look at the surface outcrop if we can, and it's there. There's not a lot from what we know, but that would certainly be something that would be wise to do.
Because of glacial till cover?
That's right, yeah. So there's a pretty extensive glacial till. It's not, it's maybe 20, maybe 30 meters thick, something like that maximum, I think. Maybe a bit more in places, but less in other places as well. But generally it's there. In the area of drilling. I think, marginally to the west and east, there's some highlands that have a little more exposure. And, I think we'll go take a look at that for sure.
Good. So I understand that phase 2 drilling, kind of the American Eagle phase 2 drilling is in planning. Have you got all of the data back from 2022? Have you got all of the core back? Have you released all of the results? Are you kind of fully up to date?
Yeah, I would say more or less. We've got all the assays back. They've all been released, both 7 holes. And we have all the core in southern BC, and we're looking at it. It's really important to pull out the assays, to model the trace element data, and look at the core again with assays in hand so that you can it just allows you to understand better what the controls on mineralization are. For example, you just look down the assay sheet and, okay, there's a break. All of a sudden you've got, lower grades after some really good grade. And, what occurs when you see that break between the better mineralization and rocks that are not as well mineralized. I mean, they're all mineralized. That's one of the big things about NAC that I really like, is that there are these better grade zones and they're broad, but in between the rocks are mineralized. They'll have maybe not that many bornite veins or something like that in them, but they all return some grade. And, it tells you that you're in a very large system. If you don't understand it, there's a darn good chance, because we've hit high grade, all the way down in these holes, or, it's not super high grade, but it's darn good grade, that somewhere in there you can put it all together, and on all it takes is more work. So, it's pretty exciting, actually.
Bornite often is kind of it attracts gold over chalcopyrite. You often find that kind of the gold is in the bornite mineral rather than elsewhere, and bornite-rich systems often have a higher gold overprint, and the NAC system seems to have that gold fingerprint. Or overlay or association. Can you identify what makes the parts of your drill hole intersections that are higher grade? What are the defining features? Is it an intensity of alteration, or is it a porosity or a permeability thing of the host rock? Is it a kind of a lithological thing, or is it a mineral assemblage? Have you managed to kind of pick out any patterns so far from the logging back with the assays?
Probably asking the wrong guy. Our project manager and the Neil Prowse and the geologist David Hoke that worked with him, deserve to be on here answering these questions. You've got to put me on the spot, but I would say I don't have that understanding right now. I wouldn't say it's always, when you get bornite, you get high gold at NAC. And that's one of the things that makes it interesting and a challenge is that, sometimes it's more the chalcopyrite rich that is carrying the gold. Other times the bornite style might be dominant and the gold's there. And I could be wrong on that, but it doesn't seem like it's just one thing or another. And I consider that good. Complicated systems that are challenging, generally are good. It's good to see that kind of complexity, and we just have to work that out yet, I would say.
Well, it's always good to have cubic kilometers of mineralized material, which is what you seem to have.
Well, that's it, right? I mean, it's pretty simple from my perspective. I love seeing, okay, well, maybe it's only, 0.15 or 0.2 or something like that for a big stretch, but, it's always mineralized all the way down these holes. I love seeing that.
And just remind me about access and snow melts and things. What's your operating window here?
Well, I mean, the neighbors, Amark Resources, are drilling right now up there. So you can drill year round, and they're drilling on the neighboring property. It actually is contiguous. There's no claims in between or anything like that, but they're drilling away on a prospect they call Duke. Obviously they wouldn't be drilling right now if they hadn't had some success. So, they've drilled before Christmas, and they're drilling and overlapped with the end of our program. And they're drilling right now. So you can drill all year round. They generally take a bit of a break when, the spring comes around because it gets kind of muddy and mucky and
the shoulder seasons.
Yeah. But then they can drill, then you can drill right into the winter and through the winter. So, it's great. And the logging roads system up there is pretty extensive. So getting around is relatively inexpensive compared to parts of BC where it's mountainous and you're using helicopters to sling the drills in, etc. Right? That's expensive. So it's good from that perspective.
No helicopters?
Not really, no. Just take the barge across Babine Lake and get on the system, and it's great.
Well, I won't presume anything. When are you likely to start drilling?
Well, we're redoing a multi-year permit. So we're working with Lake Babine Nation and the ministry, BC Ministry of Mines, to get a 5-year multi-year permit for the NAC property, and I think we hope to get going in June. So everything seems to be working out fine, I think.
Good. Well, I look forward to seeing the drill program and the definition of the targets and the rationale for that. And thank you very much for the introduction to the project. I feel as if I know a lot better than I did at the start of the call, which I think is the point of it.
Well, thanks, Merlin. I appreciate it. And we're really looking forward to getting going again this year, and I think it'll be exciting for sure.